You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering Finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seatbelts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast. And this week, we're covering something a little bit more abstract. And it's the general question is, does WotC have reprint equity left? Or how much reprint equity do they have left? And to answer that, one of the first things you need to do is define what reprint equity means to you. What do you got?
So when I was thinking about this, a lot of people want to talk about reprint equity in terms of finance and say like, okay, if the numbers aren't there from a finance perspective, then it's really difficult for us to want to buy into this Commander supplemental or this double masters or whatever it is, right? Because at this point in time, we basically know that most of these supplemental sets that don't drop into Modern are meant for Commander players. So to get people interested in these, the juice needs to be worth the squeeze from a wallet perspective because these packs cost a lot of money. So people are going to take a look at them and say, okay, what is in here that I could crack and maybe make my money back on? And that is a perfectly fine way to take a look at it. For me, when I think about reprint equity, I think a little more philosophically and I say, okay, if for people to buy into this, WotC needs to actually reprint cards that people want to play in a Commander product. So what can they reprint that people will be interested in opening and playing? And of course, they'll be interested in opening and playing those big expensive cards, but just as much they'll be interested in opening a lot of the format staples that they don't print all the time and might be a little more difficult to pick up here and there. Not to say that they're hard to find, they put Arcane Signet in everything, but that was a staple after the Brawl decks became a staple. Path to Exile and Sword to Plowshares were hard to find for a bit, things like that, things that just kind of make the format go. Ponder, Brainstorm, Preordain, Dark Writ, all very popular and powerful cards in Commander itself. So when we were thinking about this topic, and I thought about reprint equity, I came at it from that aspect as well. And what does WotC have left that they can actually put in these packs to make people interested in buying them so they can actually play a game of Commander and not necessarily just open the big flashy thing? So when I was looking at some of the data afforded to us by Rec, that's how I kind of cast my eye. And I definitely did take a look at the price part of things as well, but not as in-depth as you did. I kind of stuck with the same charts that we were given, and I looked at it from there. That's how I came about it. For you, you came at this from more of a financial standpoint, correct?
Yeah, so I basically looked at a few cards, one of which we'll touch on later in the episode. But like Mana Crypt and some Shocklands and stuff like that. Cards that are definitely staples. And I took a look at EDH cards as well as 60-card format cards. And I tried to look at every meaningful reprint. What did that do to the price? What did that do to the price for each version? And where are the prices at now compared to when it started?
Yep.
Basically to kind of get like a timeline of the financial reprints, basically, and what it looked like. Because I want to know if this card gets reprinted in a standard print set, how much do I stand to lose short-term or long-term? Mm-hmm. What am I looking at that point? Is it going to be worse for me to open? Or is there a world where I may want to hold this when these things get value later? So I took more of like that investment and technical approach to it in terms of reprint equity.
For sure. And like I said, I think that's a very good way to look at it too, because that is what is going to get the majority of people to open their wallets. The problem with Double Masters was the price tag on it for the value inside. And then again, with Commander Masters, without Dockside Mono Crypt or Vault, and just hanging everything on Jeweled Lotus, basically. That was a hard-to-swallow pill for a lot of people. But at the end of the day, when you take a look at the reprint equity afforded by staples within the format, it's not too bad. So from my perspective, when I take a look at this, I see that there's a decent amount of reprint equity left. And what I'm going to bring up now to show is, let's see. Yep. This is the stocks graph, this is the EDH rec graph for the top played cards in the last 2 years. So a decent amount of time that we have behind us. So we're not looking at anything that just kind of spiked up and might fade away in time. And what we're seeing is in the top 10 cards, Lightning Greaves is actually the most expensive card in the top 10. And just outside the top 20 at number 21, we have Cyclonic Rift at $29. And this is sorted by popularity in decks. So we just clicked on the decks column and we sorted descending. And after that, I figured that's kind of our barometer right there, is that top 20. These are the easiest to reprint cards. After that, we see a lot of other high-powered cards with a lot of reprint equity behind them and a decent price tag attached to them. We have Rhystic Study just behind Cyclonic Rift at number 22. That's in 29% of decks. So we're still seeing a very high playability in all of these cards. Demonic Tutor is number 24 in 24% of decks. Smothering Tithe is number 27 at 26%. Vamp Tutor, Esper Sentinel, Teferi's Protection. Those are all in the 30s. Mystic Remora is number 40 at 18%. So 18% of the decks on rec in the last 2 years have Mystic Remora in it. Jessica's Will, Fierce Guardianship, Enlightened Tutored, Swan Song, and then rounding out the top 50 is Dockside Extortionist in 17% of decks. That's the lowest we get, and that's still, something around like 1 in every 5.5 decks is playing a Dockside Extortionist. So just from a playability standpoint and what is left to print that would get people interested in packs, all of these cards have people interested in playing the game because they are played in so many decks.
Yep.
From an equity standpoint, just on popularity alone, utility alone, there's still a lot that can be done. You don't need to just put one card in a set. You could probably put 2 and people will be happy with that because you'll be getting a lot of cards into the hands of players that want to play something even as simple as an Esper Sentinel that is a bit of a taxing effect, but isn't as bad as Rhystic Study. And, the list is all over the place. We don't see any, big green cards on this list, which I find pretty funny at the end of the day. I guess there's not a lot of equity in high-end green cards now that Tarmogoyf has been solved. Like Birds of Paradise might literally be the most expensive green card on this. Like there's no natural.
Yeah.
I don't think natural order is worth anything anymore. But
survival.
So, yeah. That that's not in the top 50. I can tell you that much.
No, definitely not.
Little too competitive there.
Yeah.
But we see a great wealth in terms of color distribution. Everything is represented here. A lot of these cards make the game work. They aren't win cons, which is kind of nice because when you see win cons up at the top, that means generally speaking the format is a little stilted. If we were looking at playability overall, we'd probably see like Thoracle up at the top, and then that speaks for itself. That's the win con. That means a format like something like CEDH is a little bit slanted in a very specific direction. And instead, we're just seeing a lot of this kind of card draw, velocity, and protection spells in the top 50. Dockside Extortionist is probably the most egregious card on this list, rounding out the top 50. And we know there's a ton of equity behind it from a playability standpoint. So at the end of the day, when you're looking at this list, I think there's a ton here in terms of playability. So if you just change your viewpoint from, what benefits my wallet the most to what actually benefits my deck the most, you're going to see that there's still a lot of equity out there for WotC. There's still a lot that they can do. I mean, we haven't even come across any lands on this list.
Yeah.
There's no fetches, there's no shocks, there's no buddies, no temples, no surveil lands, no check lands, no tangle lands, nothing. We haven't even reached them yet. And we know all of those lands have incredible equity behind them for reprints. We know they drive sales.
So, and the thing you said that I want to touch on real quick was when you said Commander Masters was carried by Jeweled Lotus. And then you look at the list of cards that are above $20 that are staples. Okay, if you're telling me that Wizards looked at Jeweled Lotus and didn't say we can put one more in there, I don't understand that logic, because you're right. There's so much reprint equity there that you can do in a Masters product, in a supplemental, and just put 2 of those cards in there. And that to me is enough goodwill as a customer that I'll consider purchasing your product.
Yeah.
But when I'm only chasing a mythic in that set, why would I bother buying it en masse? I would rather just buy the single. just boggles my mind, and I wanted to mention that real quick.
Nope, that's fine. I do have some another monologue to speak to that. Actually, I think there's a reason behind this, and I'll get to that later. But I would like to move on towards the way you look at things, because again, I did look at things from a price standpoint. You just dug in a lot more, so I want to hear more about what you got.
So what I looked at was Mana Vault, because that is a card that is high value and high playability in EDH.
Yep.
And I looked at Breeding Pool, the Dissension, Gatecrash, and Ravnica Allegiance printings, and the same printings of God the Shrine.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to see, okay, let's take a look at when our reprints were. What is the price of these cards now? Well, the last reprint of Mana Vault was in 2022. In 2022, the 5th edition Mana Vault started declining. It just now eclipsed what its low was as of that reprint in 2022. Now, we have had the flashy reprints, but not a massive reprint. It hasn't been available in normal boosters outside of the list. And that was one that I figured, well, this covers all your bases in EDH, casual and competitive.
Yep.
So it was sitting at $50 then. It has taken 2 years from Double Masters for this card to recover to $50. Now, to me, that is an example of good use of reprint equity, because you put enough out there that it did cause a price drop for an extended period of time that made it more accessible for people that wanted to get into the format. People can affordably buy into that. Whereas, and I'm sure you remember this, there was a time where $50 was the buy list for Mana Crypt.
Yep.
It's not as fun then, because I'm not selling to as many people. The other thing was Breeding Pool, and this is something that WotC has these, I call them stock reprints, where it's, hey, we're going to this area, or we're doing this for design. This is something we're reprinting. Is it a master set? Great, it gets Mana Drain. Every time. Breeding Pool is every time we go to Ravnica. So the first reprint of this was in 2013, when it had a low of $20. Now, that art for a very long time was unique to Dissension until Ravnica Remastered. When that art got reprinted, which you would expect to put negative pressure on the price, it's still sitting at $32 low for the original printing. So that card has gone up despite multiple large reprints. Now, this is an example to me of reprint equity being used appropriately on a card with a high power level or high playability. Mm-hmm. This is what I want to see. This is a meaningful reprint that, sure, everybody knows it dips when it gets reprinted. That's fine. We expect that. Of course it's going to happen. But this is something that recovers, which, bigger picture means there are still modern blue chips where you can expect maybe this is going to continue to go up, not exactly like the reserve list, but similar to it. So what about the other printings? Well, Gatecrash in 2013 had a low of 11. It's currently sitting at 13 fresh, again, off the Ravnica Remastered reprint. And the Ravnica Allegiance one actually saw the biggest spike. Mm-hmm. It doubled in price from $7 when it was printed to $14 now. Now, obviously, we're in a Pro Tour season where that card matters, and that's why I looked at God the Shrine. This was the most interesting thing I found, because me, like a lot of people, thought there was no reprint equity to be had, that these cards are going to tank in price. And when you and I looked at the chart at first on EDH Rec, we were both like, holy shit, there's more cards here than we thought there would be that we recognize.
Yep.
That are widely played. So God the Shrine, in 2013, the Guild Pact had a price of $17. It's currently $10. Gatecrash, when it was printed, $12. Currently $9. Ravnica Allegiance was $7. It's currently $8. So it's only up $1. But this tells me that bad cards getting reprinted is just bad. Yeah. Not that God the Shrine is bad. It's just not as playable as Breeding Pool. So if I am Wizards of the Coast, and I have this stable of reprints that I can use, and I know there's good ones in there, and I have plenty of good ones, maybe the solution isn't releasing more sets or in larger quantities. It's releasing fewer sets and smaller quantities to obtain market equilibrium. Because correct me if I'm wrong, I would rather sell a Vampiric Tutor for $30 all day over $50, because I will sell that $30 Vampiric Tutor a lot easier than I will the 50.
Yep.
If they are appropriately reprinting, if they are reprinting in a manner that is impactful, short term, downward on the price, knowing that long term the playability of the card's just going to carry it. And I understand. Wizards says they don't care about the secondary market. Then they release secret layers. Then they mess up secret layers. And then they fix secret layers and still maintain that they don't care about the secondary market. And then they release collector boosters. They clearly do. There is a way for you to reprint cards and not trigger a reserve list level panic. You can print sets that aren't in the quantities you've been printing sets. What was it? 750,000 collector boosters for the set before Fallout?
I think so.
Based on, or for Ravnica Remastered, based on just the Shocklands?
Yeah, serialization times odds.
Yeah, it's absolutely absurd. You don't need to do that. You can, and they have in the past, meaningfully reprinted these cards in a way that, look, in a lot of cases, caused it to go up or recover or just have accessibility to the format. All these things are good.
Yep, for sure.
They can do it.
Nope, I agree. For me, when I was taking a look at the price side of things, something kind of struck, and it was when I was looking at the same chart that I was before, but from rec, just sorted by TCG player, price, descending, and what we see is basically the majority of the cards that I mentioned earlier on this list, and then a couple others like Sylvan Library. That's like the most expensive green card that is here, all the way down to like some simple cards like Reanimate and Swan Song, Noble Hierarch. And
remember when that was $50?
Oh yes, I do. All of mine cost $25.
Yeah.
The high equity looks from a financial standpoint that are left are cards that do appeal to a fair portion of the format. You know, 1 in every 5 or 6 players, like I mentioned earlier, but they do change the context of the format from something, or to something rather, more competitive, something much faster than a casual format. So contextually speaking, if WotC does want to keep the format casual and more, quote, low-key, unquote, less powerful, they have to drip these cards out. They can't flood the market. If WotC were to flood the market, then they lose equity on the pre-cons as they would then be underpowered, and now there's a paradigm shift that has to happen if they wish to sell those products because they'll no longer represent a good on-ramp into the format. So from a financial standpoint, I do think WotC is running out of... do I think WotC is running out of reprint equity? Not really. They still have gems to put into supplementals to sell packs. Where I do think they are losing equity, though, is the creativity needed to drive Commander set sales. Instead of creating sets with solid playable cards that they need to add chase reprints to sell packs to because they lack the design resources or understanding of format drivers to move packs. And to me, this is more damning because it means that in time, they'll effectively weaponize supplemental sets against the players, and people will stop buying into the random Commander products released throughout a year, as they just won't contain good enough cards to compete with the supplementals.
Yeah.
So that's where I think the reprint equity is lost in regards to the financial side of things, right? Not that there isn't reprint equity to be had. There is. But when you just slam it all out there, and you don't drip it out, you don't do maybe 2 or 3 in a set, and then you do multiples of these sets a year, then you put downward pressure on your bread and butter Commander products, your on-road Commander products, and just people become only interested in these supplemental sets, not your, I don't know what to call them, like your core product for Commander. Yeah. And you create this weird value rub that I don't think you can ever really recover from if you don't drip these cards out. That isn't to say that I agree with the way they have been handling that drip. I just think that from that perspective, that's kind of the most damning thing, is that they're not creating unique enough cards to sell the sets on their own. The Commander Masters, the Baldur's Gate stuff, there just weren't just enough interesting cards in there to sell the sets on their own. They needed to juice it, so they put a couple of these cards in. Then they do a reprint set, and they need to put a couple of these cards in to sell the reprint set, because the rest of the card base is just like meant for draft, so it can't be overpowering. The power level has to be pretty low, otherwise it's not a fun draft format.
Yeah.
Okay? And then you print another supplemental set, and you do a couple more of these, and now you're at your 4th supplemental set in a fucking year. And it's just like, where are you gonna spend your money? 2, why would I buy anything that's underpowered? Like when you're just looking at product, why would I buy the monthly commander deck when I can buy a couple packs of the supplemental, or just save the money and buy the singles from the supplemental? And that kind of weaponizes the supplementals against the set-based commander product, something you've been hanging your hat on for like 4 or 5 years now, it feels like.
That's been their bread and butter, yeah.
Yeah. Once they changed from yearly to setly.
Yep.
So for me, when I look at price, that's what I see is, from a price standpoint, holy heck, there's still a lot of equity to be had, and people will eat everything up. I mentioned Sylvan Library, Noble Hierarch down at the bottom of the list. People eat those cards up. Constructed players will eat up Noble for you.
Noble, yeah.
Yeah. Like, Sylvan Library is not an overpowering card in Commander. It has a very appropriate offset. The price, so to speak, of that effect is...
Drawing 3 every turn. It's great.
Yeah, at the cost of 8 life. Unlike,
that's free.
But basically, eventually you learn that, or you just put a Loxodon Warhammer in your deck and kabong. Like,
Great.
Yeah, it's not that difficult to work around. But it is a nice and fun card to deal with. It's not, like, obnoxiously powered. And so what if it's a $10 card into Forever? It doesn't matter. The thing's a $30 card right now. Who cares?
Yeah.
And
the thing that gives me some hope is, and we touched on this last episode, the design of Fallout. Because the meaningful reprints were there, but it was like Ravages, Crucible, like they were fine, but they also had good design. The problem is that's not a habit of theirs.
Correct.
And I refuse to believe it's something they're doing until they do it for a year straight of like good design.
Yep.
And then Outlaw spoilers posted and it looks pushed as hell.
Yeah.
So here we are again.
Yeah. This is something that I was talking about. I don't know if it was today or yesterday with Mox Kitty about. Is it the new Olivia, the Mardu Olivia?
Yeah. That was yesterday.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's about the Outlaw mechanic and how it just kind of glues together all these disparate creature types until you realize they're all primarily Mardu. Like Warlock is on here, which is just a random tag along, and it's like, okay, sure, I guess. And the only comparison point you have is the party mechanic. And there it is, Olivia, Opulent Outlaw.
Yeah.
An outlaw is an assassin, a mercenary, a pirate, a rogue, or a warlock. And assassins...
Solid design.
Yeah, assassin, generally black, branches into Golgari. Mercenaries, definitely black. You look at Nemesis, right? That was the Rebels and Mercenary set.
Yep. You
have pirates that span Grixis. And rogues, which are just kind of what they are. Mainly,
wherever.
Yeah, mainly red.
Yeah.
And like at the end of the conversation, like I said, I don't think this mechanic is overpowering. I think it just speaks to the fact that they didn't really know how to get all these creatures together, and that there's no real good Mardu type identity right now. So you have humans and you have, I can only think of, I think it was just humans and vampires. Yeah. You have humans and vampires.
Vampires, yeah.
Right? So Olivia kind of glues the rest together and gives you the next type. But it's like uninspired and boring design to just put +1/+1 counters on them all, despite the fact that, it is a very Mardu thing to do. Just spray counters around. We have historically that effect. We have the vampire side of things in Mardu, that does the counters there. We have the Drana.
All the Rakdos mechanics like Unleashed.
That put counters on. Yeah, the Drana that has First Strike, the one from Oath of the Gatewatch, somewhere around there, that has First Strike and puts counters on everything when it deals damage. So in the First Strike portion of combat damage, it deals damage, then your team grows, and then your team deals... Like, that's not there. It's not this unique mechanic. It's just uninspired design. And so that's what I kind of see is the loss of these sets. So they need this kind of reprint equity to push everything up. And when you see that this lack of creativity kind of stems almost seemingly from certain aspects of standard sets because they're trying to wedge in Commander product, you do kind of get to see again and again that there is this like gap in what goes on in these Commander sets where they're just not inspired to design a lot of good cards. They're just inspired to design cards for the set that fit what they need.
Fit.
Yeah. And it is what it is, and I think that's the problem. I don't think it's the lack of reprint equity. I think it's that we need the reprint equity to move these sets, and so when the equity's not there, you feel it more. If the designs were more inspired, if we didn't just have the 5 dragons in Baldur's Gate, if the set was much flatter in terms of interest and playability, then I don't think that set would have been as much of a failure as it was for like the 6 months to a year that it just flopped.
Right.
Like, people are interested in rolling dice, sure, but like there wasn't a lot of cool dice rolling stuff in there outside of the dragons. Eventually some stuff got picked up and we get more supplemental stuff in Fallout and it drips out, but like they could have done a lot more with that, so they could have done a lot more with Commander Masters, and now I'm just kind of repeating myself. So I think
you ready for picks?
I absolutely am.
All right,
I got a full head of steam, so I'm gonna take this one on.
go for it.
So for me, I'm taking a look at Second Harvest, a card that's been on my list for about 5 months now. Second Harvest
Love that card.
It is really good. I thought it was a reprint. It is not. It is from Shadows over Innistrad. It is a 6 mana instant, and it goes like this: 2 and double green for an instant. For each token you control, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of that permanent. So easy peasy. You just double down on all your tokens. Reading the card explains the card. Really nice. When I put this on my list back in October, CK was buying 88 at $4. There were 200 listings, LP or better, on TCG Player. The market was $5.50, and CK had 3 for sale at $7. About a month later, in November, CK was buying 59 for $4.20. Nice. So that's down in quantity, up in price. And they had 7 for sale at $7.50. So again, a neat little bump. When I was taking my notes, CK was buying 25 at $3.50. They had none in stock, and right now they are buying 35 at $4.30. So we've seen an increase in both of those, and my guess is that they still have 0 in stock. The retail number was $8.50. I've not had the time to check retail today. There were 230 listings on TCG Player for a market of 577, and right now we see 247 listings at a market price of 571. So we're seeing that kind of trademark rush to sell as this card continues to move up and buy lists continue to crank. When we look at this card and what it does in Commander, we touched on it already. We're making a bunch of tokens and we're going wide and entering combat, baby. This is what we're here for. Choo-choo, motherfucker. Now, when you break it down, and you look at this card, one of the things that I think immediately come to mind is, well, why are we looking at a card that doubles your tokens instead of something like O'Hare Talk or Doubling Season? When, I like looking at those cards because they go well with something like they go well with token strategies. They just don't do what this does. They do it over time. You've got to make your token, and then you get 2 copies. You get a copy of it. You get 2 copies of 3 copies. No. This doubles everything right then and there, and it allows for both a wider adoption across the format and also a weirder adoption within the format. So if you have your token army on board and then you play Doubling Season or O'Hare Talk, guess what? That's it. They're done. There's nothing going on. But once you have your token army, Second Harvest doubles that army. So it has a more interesting and more immediate impact on the board state than anything else does. Primal Vigor, whatever. Not Second Harvest. Parallel Lives, the other one, right?
Yep.
What I mean by this is that there are a lot of ways to play token-based strategies, letting you go wide and attack for the win. We've talked a lot about Perforos, God of the Forge, Kira Negotiations, Pandemonium, using those to win the game. You can go tall on a number of tokens with Craterhoof style effects. You can generate absurd amounts of mana using your tokens in cards like Cryptolith, right, etc. But then you can get weird with a commander like Thromok the Insatiable and introduce the Devour mechanic in a meaningful way because you have leftover tokens to continue to playing the game with if Thromok gets trucked. Because once you feed Thromok, generally speaking, your board's gone. But when you double your tokens, you don't need to feed him that much more. And for those that don't know what Thromok does, let me see if I can find this real quick. It has Devour, and basically it gets plus X
Yeah.
Yeah. It can basically, you double its power. Whatever. So even with something like Lonus Cryptozoologist, it reminds us that tokens aren't just creatures, but can be something like a clue or treasure. You'll also see Second Harvest in that kind of deck as well, which I found really, really interesting. There we go. My stocks graph was just messed up, so let's pop over to Rec real quick. There's Thromach. Thromach the Insatiable. Devour X, where X is the number of creatures devoured this way. As this enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. This creature enters the battlefield with X+1/+1 counters on it for each of those creatures, right? So if you just go wide, blow out your tokens, feed Thromach, and leave a bunch behind, you still have a game to play. If you don't go wide, you don't have the ability to go wide before you play Thromach. You don't have Second Harvest. You got to go small or get blown out, one or the other. And then so the other element that I mentioned is this: there are commanders out there that remind you that, hey, tokens aren't just creatures. They can be things like clues as well. They can be artifacts. Brutoclad plays into this, so you have to extend it a teamer, but you have that as well. And this also plays well with some commanders that are a bit more aggressive, like Chatterfang, which is a known combo commander, right? So for every token you make, Chatterfang also makes a squirrel. So you make a creature, Chatterfang makes a squirrel. And so now you can blow that out. You have Risk the Redeemed and Wart the Raid Mother as well, which enjoy making elves and goblins respectively. And when you start making those tokens, you can take over the board pretty easily. Those are known types with a number of Lord effects, so you can pump your creatures pretty easily, even without something like a coat of arms, and just kind of run roughshod with that. And these are obviously elves are green. Wart the Raid Mother is the Gruul Goblin commander, so it fits perfectly in there. And these let these combo decks kind of quickly and reliably finish the game and makes them even more competitive than you might think they were. So something that is kind of casual like Wart can be more competitive because of this token generation. So again, this is another card that spans the gamut in terms of broad format appeal, but this time it also offers a pretty unique and interesting way to make some commanders function either at all or in ways that are a bit unexpected. Now, from a timeline on this, this is seeing a pretty slow and steady slope like I showed earlier on stocks, and the reason that we are seeing this kind of sawtooth graph when you move in is because right now there isn't a build around set of cards or strategy handed to us by WotC with the Fallout stuff. We did not get really a lot of great token synergies, and when that happens, Second Harvest just kind of starts to plateau, maybe even dip a little. But the slope that we've been on is something I like. So if we don't see a lot of artificial pressure placed on this card, it'll move organically, and this will let us move ahead of the curve. This does sell about 10 copies a day, mixed between LP and near mint, and as such, we will see a slow drain over the next few months, which is great. If we buy in now, we need to wait for about 100 to 120 total copies to sell before this becomes a $7 card, and we can make our exit within a month pretty easily from there. If you want to wait for buy list, though, they seem to either be stalled out or trailing downwards, as this card is not part of the current hype cycle for Commander product, so I wouldn't expect a decent timeline on that avenue, and I think that's really telling. When I was looking for trend tracking on the price, I did notice that spikes in the card that remained and held steady generally coincided with the release of a token-based deck from WotC. And the last one we got was the Secret Lair, the Cats and Dogs. That was the last real big push for this kind of just go wide tokens. And that's basically when we see Second Harvest kind of take off and not really come back. And from there, like I said, we've just been kind of sawtoothing as somebody lists a copy or several copies for cheap and they get bought out. Otherwise, our slope would be slow and steady, which is fantastic. It's organic growth. It's what we like. Reprint equity on this. I'm honestly surprised this hasn't been put into a standard set yet, but we continue to get white token doubling effects, so I understand why it's not. From a supplemental set standpoint, I think we'll see this from time to time when WotC both makes a token-centric commander deck and wants that deck to go overly wide with green as its color base. And I don't think that's going to be a yearly thing. When you take a look at the print runs on this compared to what WotC does with tokens, you'll see this is like an every couple of years kind of card. And like I said, I don't understand why we keep getting white token doublers in standard and not green. It doesn't seem like it would be terribly overpowering with the way standard sets function now. So if we ever were to catch a standard reprint, this would probably crush the price for about a year. But at that point in time, you should have made what you need. Buy quantities. I just have a couple of these from when SOI was in standard, but I'd be happy vesting into about 8 of these. I think that would be about $50-ish, and I think that's a perfectly fine number to have. There are a fair amount of token players out there. You could probably move 2 or 3 easily to your locals, and then from there, just sit on them for, like I said, a couple of weeks, maybe a month and a half, and this will be a $7 card, up from about $5.70 right now. It'll be an easy out to TCG player in the open market.
I think this card's great. The fact that it's an instant is something that is always lost on me because green is not a color that typically operates in instant speed. But this is one of my favorite low visibility casual token cards because it's just low-key a card that people forget is $5.
Yep.
They forget it has a price because it's not doubling season, it's not parallel lives, it's not any of the big known token doublers. And it just quietly sits there moving up in price.
Yep.
And just having good liquidity behind it. And this is one of those looks that like I love this. It's amazing.
I think it's just a card people don't realize exists because it's overshadowed by doubling season and parallel lives and primal vigor and O'Hare talk and
Unbound flourishing and yeah, exactly.
Right. So like we used to talk a bunch about like the content creator push, etc. And those token decks generally don't go wide because they win with Crater Hoof. And as we've talked about, for whatever reason, winning in combat with Crater Hoof is taboo. So you don't get a lot of that on casual commander channels that often. Yeah. But there is opportunity for when somebody wants to go and win with tokens in Crater Hoof, that at any point in time, Second Harvest shows up there, and then the commander populace writ large is reminded that this is a card and just kind of bulldozes it.
Yeah, it does really good, really well in those.
Yep. All right, what do you got?
So I have the other card I monitored for today's episode, and that is Mana Crypt. Specifically, I'm going for the Eternal Masters version here. Now, there's something very important to look at when looking at the pricing graph on stocks, and that is the Ikoria symbol and the price point there, where we have just after that a low of 170 in late May, market of 150. That matters because that was when Double Masters came out. So we hit a bottom there shortly thereafter, and now we have finally recovered to the price that we were at when we hit our reprint. So why am I picking it when it was this price before the last reprint? Because we know the set release schedule for the year.
Yep.
There's no sets that they're putting Mana Crypt in. Unless, and I will put this on record, I will eat my own hand, this one, if they print Mana Crypt in Modern Horizons 3 for an episode. I will prepare it, cut it off, everything myself. Without that happening, there is nowhere they're going to print Mana Crypt. And Mana Crypt, as we know, is one of the more popular high dollar cards in Commander because it's seen as a status symbol within the format.
Yep.
You've made it once you have a Mana Crypt in your deck. Great. There are a lot of people who will come up at a booth and say, I don't want to sell my Mana Crypt. It's my most expensive card in the deck. It's a card that people attach status to. They attach desirability to it. Mm-hmm. And it's something that as we get more and more big events, which we have the FCG Con schedule for the year, we'll have Pro Tours, we'll have everything else. This will just naturally continue to rise. Now, I think in terms of quantity, you probably only want 2 or 3 in your trade binder or in your inventory without turning them over into others. Yep. Thing is, if you look at the TCG player sales, this is selling multiple copies a day. This is not a $150 card that's sitting there with no movement. You know, it's not one of the San Diego Comic-Con walkers. This is a card that people play with. It has liquidity, desirability, everything. And right now, we're at a seemingly stable price point where we've recovered after the floor. And more importantly, we just had a, I don't want to say sizable reprint, but it wasn't a negligible reprint either with the alt arts from Dinos. Return to Ikoria. So we had a reprint. We saw that it didn't really impact the price much, which was what I think a lot of people were waiting on, because this reprint for a card like this should impact it, because it was a collector booster set. They were out there. There were like 8 different versions or whatever it is. Now that we've seen it's just kept the price stable and hasn't made it go down, this is the time to start buying, because it's going to start going up again. We've hit our open. The sets, there's not going to be a wide amount of that set reopened at this point. What's out there is out there. As that dries up, as the Eternal Masters, as the Double Masters dry up, over the next 9 months, there's no reprints coming. But people will need this card. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to call it out now, because sitting at a stable floor of a whopping, 170, which is a little high. But when it was reprinted, it was 120 right after that. So we've recovered 50% back to where we were before the reprint. And granted, it took 3 years, but a 50% return in 3 years is pretty good last I checked. So I think it's a solid call out. I think 2 to 3 is really where you want to be. And in terms of reprint equity, like I said, there's none. There's no way they are printing this unless it's their pilot card for the new Secret Lair series. But I feel like we say that caveat so much at this point that it just goes without saying that that can happen, of course.
Yeah, there's something to be said about both Crypt and Vault, because they've effectively become the face cards for
more than Soul Ring.
Yeah, for not just the format on the whole, but also the supplemental sets that they want to move, and are basically telling you, like, hey, this is a commander set. You'll get one or both of these in there.
Yeah.
They were both masterpieces, right? So I think if you want to look at one, you can look at both, and you can kind of hang your hat on both of them, because they're doing the same stuff. Like Crypt was reprinted in Ixalan. It had the neon versions, which is what you were mentioning, and I brought the stock scrap up for Vault, which is finally recovering after its is it Double Masters printing.
Yeah, Double Masters for that one as well.
And so there's nowhere for either of these cards to be, and they go hand in hand. You play them both in formats where you can play them both. I think if you're going to look at one, you should always be looking at the other. And I think moving in on Crypt, like you said, and picking up a number of copies, to move locally. If you have more competitive Commander players, great luck. I don't know how many that would be, or if you would want to go on Neon or one of the other ones. I think Vault is also a good look as well. Like if you wanted to pull up, and if you had the opportunity to throw down 200 on this, you could pick up like 2 Crypts and 2 Vaults, have a little bit left over, and that sates 2 players. That's not the worst thing in the world, but there's also steady growth to be had on these, so you can move in on one, the other, or both, and know that for the rest of this year, like you said, we're not going to be getting a reprint, so this is just going to be steady growth, and all you need to do is give it some time.
Yeah, right? It's like right now, I feel like Mana Crypt is the closest thing to reserve list you can possibly get without being reserve list in terms of return on investment.
Yeah, and it's moving better than most reserve list cards are anyway, because it's playable in Commander and doesn't have, and it's not actually reserve list, so it doesn't have that aggressive argument around it about like.
God. I laugh because I know people who don't play reserve list because they don't want to deal with, shut up.
Yeah. Ugh. So at the end of the day, I like Crypt as a look overall for a spec. Like you said, I agree, not going too deep on them, because if you don't have a way to churn them frequently, then it is just kind of sinking money for a bit. If you're just like a regular person, if you got a booth or a store, then just churn through as many copies as you can. Yeah. Like just stack them. And I would, like I said, I would extend that to Vault as well. I think Vault needs to be lended some credibility in these conversations. It is a very powerful piece. It is a very important piece of the format. And if you're going to look at one, you should look at the other, because they generally trend about the same. Yeah. Which is up until reprinted, then tank and return. And every single time. Every time. Clockwork. So again, I agree. People should own these cards. If you don't want to play them because you think they're too aggressive, that's fine. Others don't. So there's always opportunity to move them. Right. Anything else before we cut out?
Nope.
All right. So for at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube, I am at Halt. I am Reptar on Twitter. You are
Earl, as in my name is Earl.
And we'll see you next week.